Good morning. Today we're celebrating a Ryan Report milestone. Today is the 500th broadcast of this show. You know, it took a long time to get here. It's been a fun ride for me, and I hope you've enjoyed it as well. So today we celebrate our 500th show. It starts right now.
From TV6, this is the Ryan Report. Here's your host, Don Ryan.
Well, almost 17 years ago, on November 16th, 2003, the Ryan Report went on the air for the very first time. It was a new experience for me and for TV6. Just to remind us of how it started, I have a video clip to show you just what it looked like, and also to recall our very first guest on our very first show. Welcome to the first edition of the Ryan Report. I'm glad you could join us for our first show. A few words of explanation are probably appropriate. Many of you will likely recall that for a number of years I served as the manager of public affairs for Cleveland Cliffs, often appearing as a spokesman for the company on this station. Well, that's no longer the case since I retired at the end of July. Some of you will realize that my taking on this assignment is not really unusual, since I'm returning to a place where I spent about 9 years in an earlier part of my career. From the mid-60s to mid-70s, I was here at TV6 doing news, sports, and weather, and handling some management assignments as well. All I can say is, it's good to be back. But now, on with the first show. We're especially pleased to have as our first guest on our first show, Michigan Governor Jennifer Granholm. The governor was in Marquette recently to conduct a public meeting on the state's financial crisis, and took the time to sit down with us and discuss some of the challenges facing Michigan. Since the interview occurred almost on the anniversary date of her election, we asked her if she considered at that time that she would still be dealing with these serious financial issues a year later.
Knew when I was elected that we would be facing a budget deficit. Everybody talked about it, but at the time we thought it would be $1 billion. That's what we all kept talking about during the campaign. When I get there in January, I learned that it's not $1 billion, but rather $2 billion, $1.7 billion in what's known as the general fund, and about $300 million in the school fund. So we began to cut in January. I presented a budget in March, which began just a month ago in October, and we adopted it in July, and we cut all of this out of, we cut, in fact, the largest amount out of state government than at any time in the history of Michigan. It was hard. We made difficult cuts. And then we get to October, and we find out that the revenue still doesn't meet because the economy has gone south. It's been a year of cuts.
And so after a year, are you still feeling good about your job?
I love this job. It is a very challenging time to be governor. I think it would have been a lot easier to be governor in the 90s when there was a lot of money to hand out. But I think the greatest privilege of all is exercising leadership in times that are tougher. That's really when your decisions have impact on people. And so it's a great privilege to be in the chair.
500 shows is a fairly significant milestone in television for a weekly show, and was even more of a challenge to get here when you realize it started out for me as something to keep me involved for a while after I retired from working full-time. I didn't expect to be on the air this long. As a matter of fact, I talked with TV6 News Director Steve Asplund this week and asked him if, in the beginning, he thought I would still be doing this 17 years later.
Not a chance. I gave it about 5-6 years, and I figured that you'd have a run with it and you'd move on to other things. But it's great to see you're still sticking around.
Neither of us would have ever thought we'd be putting the news together or the Ryan Report in the way we're doing it today. But it seems to be working out pretty well, doesn't it?
It is. I mean, I'm kind of surprised that it's gone as smoothly as it has. I mean, your show has really kind of taken on a whole new form. You're able to get a lot of people that wouldn't be able to travel to the UP, but still through this medium and this way of doing it, you're able to get them on the air and get some good information out there, such as Steve Mariucci and others. And, you know, it's a great way to cover the news. It's very challenging because it presents a whole new set of problems as opposed to traveling to these locations and then coming back with the story.
You know, it must get awful lonely for you in that newsroom without all the news people around these days.
You know, you're used to having a lot of people, a lot of chatter, and you kind of get used to that. And now it's not only lonely, but it's really quiet. I mean, you hear the scanner and there's 3 other people in the newsroom, and it gets a whole different personality about things because you used to bounce ideas off to people, and and get their thoughts on a certain subject, how to spell a word, in fact. And now it's like, well, there's nobody here, so it's just me, and I guess I'll have to search it out on my own.
One of the interesting things has been watching the sports and the
Yeah.
way you guys have come up with ways to have interesting sports features from the past, because nothing is happening right now. That's
Yeah,
worked
we're
very
really,
well.
it has worked extremely well, and we're very fortunate that we have Mike Ludlam, who's still here, who's still working, even though he's not on the air every night, but he's putting all those together, and with his vast knowledge and local experience, he's able to draw upon that and remember those type of cases. Last night, in fact, he was just looking at the Lance Purple Hornets championship game from 1966, and he was able to find some footage of that, and he'll be putting a story together about that. So he's able to go through the decades in regards to what was important in sports for Upper Michigan. And then he's doing some current stuff, but sports is going to be a slow comeback, both locally and nationally, as we go through the summer.
Speaking of the 60s, you know, if we had a more complete library, I was doing sports back in the 1960s. So see if we can find any of that.
I'll do that. You also did news and weather too.
So I really want to thank you for coming in and being part of it. And I really appreciate all the support you've provided for the show through the years.
Well, Don, it's a pleasure on my part, you know, having you as the senior person and following in your footsteps. And you still have great ideas and perspective on everything from politics on down to local issues. And it's great to get that kind of input when you're trying to put stuff together, because the younger people just don't have that perspective or that background that experience speaks to. And it's great to have you. I wish you were back here in the newsroom, and I look forward to your return.
Well, thanks, Steve. I look forward to getting back to the desk in the studio as well. I'll be back with more on our 500th show after we take this break. Well, on our second show on November 23rd, 2003, we featured an interview with then Representative Tom Casperson. So it's a pleasure to welcome him to our 500th show. Before talking with Senator Casperson today, I have a short clip from that 2003 show where he's responding to a question about mining projects that were then being considered in Marquette and Menominee counties.
One of the things I've ran into with this issue, number one, tried to get myself informed as to what's going on, who's involved, what the controversy is, and weigh that all out. And what I found is that it's a very passionate issue. You look at minerals, you look at the things that we use every day. We need these things to get by. We drive our cars, we put gas in our cars, we build homes, you know, things are made out of steel, gold, nickel, copper, aluminum. We need all these things. So what I've been trying to do is get all the information and walk it through and make sure that everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Well, I began my conversation with Senator Casperson telling him about the clip we just played, noting that the Eagle Mine has been in operation in Marquette County for over 5 years, and the Back 40 project in Menominee County has yet to begin operations.
You know, the mining issue, Don, I never dreamt I'd be part of that. I come up from a logging background, and little did I know I'd become heavily involved in the mining background. But the Eagle Mine was the beginning of the whole process. We had to get that one through the maze first, if there was any hope for any of the others. And lengthy process, but it was well worth it. And boy, when you look back now and see where the mine was and where it is today and what it means to our community in the Upper Peninsula, it was well worth it.
You were in your first year in the legislature. Was it what you expected it would be when you got there, or did you have some new things to learn?
I had new things to learn. I went in a little bit intimidated. Kind of felt a little bit like I was out of my league, you know, coming out of a trucking background, and all of a sudden I'm into the legislature, and, you know, now what, and who do I think I am to be down here? But once I got settled in a little bit and kind of looked around and realized that we're all the same, you know, people are just people. And I found that if you had passion and had a heart and desire to make change and to fix things and do things, you'd be okay at it.
It's kind of interesting for me to note that this was your first year in the legislature, or that was. Governor Granholm had just taken control of the governor's seat from the Republicans. So you had kind of a similar situation to what you have today. Democratic governor, Republicans in control of the legislature. What was the working relationship with the governor back then?
Well, again, you know, you go in brand new, and I'd never really been involved in the legislative process. This was all new to me. And I went down with the attitude that once the elections are over, you put the swords down, you go to work. And so that's what I expected. And, you know, it was a little difficult in the House because there's so many members, you know, that are involved. So the relationship with the governor we weren't real close because there was just so many of us for her to actually be engaged with. And but at the beginning, we did know each other pretty well because she had been up in the UP and had campaigned, and had a kind of a funny incident with her at the fair when she was at the fair campaigning. I saw her there, and I wanted to go meet her just to say that I met someone running for the position. And I didn't realize I had a bunch of posthumous stickers on my shirt when I went up to say hi to her. And the conversation ended very friendly, and she poked me in the chest and said, maybe next year you'll be wearing my stickers. And I said, maybe. And so we started off on a good foot.
You were with me on that second show, and you were actually back many times. Did you see that as a good way to share information with your constituents?
It absolutely was, Don. I was always amazed at how many people would come up to me after doing the Ryan Report and say, hey, I saw you on Don's show. And it clearly was obvious that your show was having an impact to reach people, and a lot of people watch the program. You don't know that when you go into the studio and it's a one-on-one with you and we're talking. You don't realize, because you're looking at a camera, how many people are actually out there watching. But it was clear once you got out in the public talking to people, how many people were watching that show.
And I remember we also shared a day when President Bush came, and you were involved in that, and we had a conversation after that, and that was a pretty exciting time, wasn't it?
It really was, Don, and I can tell you that, you know, there's legacy things and memorable things that you remember when you serve in the legislature, and that had to be one of the highlights. And you know, you put together that DVD, and it was really something really cool, at kind of beginning to end, if you will, of that whole visit. And I had the honor of being able to place one of those DVDs in the hands of Karl Rove. And then Karl shared with me that when President Bush left Marquette, the first person he called was Karl. And Karl said, it was one of the most memorable events he's done on a campaign trail. And the way he described it was the energy was overwhelming in the building. And I don't think you can deny that. Anybody that was there could never deny that. And I did think it was special. And then to have the president confirm it, that was pretty cool.
Yeah, it was amazing. Speaking of legacy things, you know, as you wound up your career in Lansing, you must look back with, you know, happy to accomplish some things and probably disappointed some things that you weren't able to accomplish. But we obviously can't cover them all. But anything that really stands out in your mind?
Well, I think for the beginning, when I came in, the thing that motivated me to run for office, Don, was really a fatal accident with a young woman and her 2-year-old daughter got killed when wood came off a logging truck and struck them up in the Sagola area. And one of the first bills I passed was the crib trailer legislation, you know, very green behind the ears and a rookie. And I went in with full of spit and vinegar to solve that problem. And that was the first thing I got through. So that one I'll always remember.
You faced some very serious health issues in the past couple of years. How are you doing now? You look very good.
Thank you. I'm doing well. It has been a challenge. I was doing really well, and then last fall kind of took a turn for the worse, and had to go back in for some heavy duty treatment. But you know, Don, I have had some of the best treatment around, and most of it's been from the Upper Peninsula. I went to the University of Michigan where the diagnosis was taken care of, and they found it. And then I went to Dickinson County. That's where Dr. Morrell is my oncologist. He's just a fabulous man. Just trust him, and he's been so good to me. He coordinates with the university where it needs to be. I've been into Marquette. Marquette has handled a lot of the issues that I've had. They've done a lot of the scanning and different things, and coordinated also with Dickinson, St. Francis Hospital. When my health went south on me this fall, I ended up in Munising, and I have nothing but praise for the healthcare people. The nurses have been absolutely fabulous, doctors. So when I hear people grumble a little bit about our healthcare, I challenge it a little bit, because we have good people up here. We're very fortunate.
It was great to share some memories with Senator Tom Casperson, and especially good to hear that he's doing well. I'll be back in just 2 minutes. Our final guest this morning is TV6 Vice President and General Manager Rick Rhodes. Here's how that conversation started.
Well, Rick, thanks for joining us here on our 500th show. It's great to have you with us.
Well, thanks for having me, Don. It's a pleasure and it's an honor to be on here.
You know, we have shows like Discovering and Finland Calling, which have been on the air a lot more than 500 episodes. But still, I think 500 episodes is a pretty good record for a weekly local show. Agree?
500 episodes for a weekly local show is a really good accomplishment. I mean, it's not often do you have, to reach this. I mean, you've been doing this for 10, 20 years, 15 years is right. How long have you been doing this?
100 years, actually. Well,
100
actually, it's 17 years because I took a break in the middle.
But 17 years is on the Ryan Report.
Right.
Great. A lot of great guests, a lot of great people have come through the station, and I know that your show is one of the more most watched shows on the weekend, and one of the more popular local shows.
And I don't know if you know this, but this actually started when I met with Brad Van Slyters, who was the general manager at the time. And we kind of worked out a plan, and this was the result of it. And it was actually Brad who gave it the name, The Ryan Report.
Really?
Right.
Brad Van Slyters. Well, a creative mind and a legendary general manager.
That's right. You know, I was thinking, I'm a little disappointed because, you know, if this was normal, like back in the studio, I thought you'd probably have a party maybe, or at least have a cake for me or something to celebrate this occasion.
We would have for sure had cake and maybe a little more. Steve Aspen likes the ice cream cake. But yeah, we would have done some celebrating, and we should celebrate once we get back to normal here, and we'll plan on a nice celebration when we can get back to normal.
Speaking of getting back to normal, how are things going? You still have many of the staff working from home. Is that working out well?
It's working out very well. We haven't brought anybody back since March when we put about 65 to 70% of our staff working remote. Those 65 to 70% are still working remote. We're right now it's kind of a month by month basis. We're not bringing anybody back in June, and we're going to evaluate July at the end of June. But we've still taken a lot of precautions. People coming into the building have to have their temperature taken. We've just bought a bunch of air purifiers. We have about 500 masks that we had shipped to us from our corporate office. We got hand sanitizer, and we bought a fogger. So, you know, we're doing what we can to prepare for when people come back to make sure that they feel safe.
You know, as I look back at the fact that we've done 500 shows, the most, I guess, fascinating part, even for me, is the number of interesting guests we've had, people who are leaders in just so many fields. And, as a result of the show, we had them come through the doors at TV6. And, I think that's made it pretty special.
It's made it really special. And, your show has opened up a lot of doors for us in the public sector, in the private sector, in the political sector. I've been here for going on 17 years, and I've seen the last 3 governors walk through the building multiple times to be interviewed by you. That's huge for our little local station and our local market. We've also been introduced from company CEOs and decision makers, and so all that has to do with the folks that you've been bringing in the building, and because of you, you've opened up a lot of doors for our business, and thank you for that.
Well, and I'm really glad you could join us on our 500th show. Anything special you want to say before we go?
No, just congratulations, Don. This is a huge achievement, and I wish we could celebrate in person, but we will celebrate. And 500 episodes, that's a huge deal, and here's to 500 more.
And I thank Rick for those kind words and his continuing support for this show. Some final thoughts after we take this break. This being our 500th show, I wanted to share a few behind-the-scenes memories of things that have happened over the years. Surprisingly, with that number of shows, there have only been 3 or 4 times when the guests didn't show up. The guest appearances are scheduled at a specific time and date, so the studio is available and the right production people are here to produce the show. When a guest isn't here at showtime, it can create some real problems. Thankfully, it only happened a few times, and none of those were intentional on the part of the guest. It always was because of a misunderstanding on when they were expected to be here. There have been some changes since I started doing the show from home because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but most of those 500 shows were produced in the studio like a live show. That meant we rolled the video at the start of the show and didn't stop until it was done. There was basically no editing, and the guests were on the spot to answer my questions as we did the show. Considering we did this 500 times, there was only one time when a guest froze and just couldn't speak, and we had to stop the show. It can be intimidating to be sitting in front of several cameras with someone peppering you with questions. In that one case, only a few minutes of off-camera conversation and everything was okay, and we started from the top and completed the show. And there were only 2 shows out of 500 when we did a little editing because of slip-ups by the guest. The most unusual thing to happen over all these years occurred one day about an hour before I was scheduled to do a show. You see, there's a heavy metal door in the back entrance to the newsroom, and on that day, I was returning to the newsroom after checking some things in the studio, and Andrew Lacombe was heading for the studio. I think I was leading with my head as I approached the door when suddenly it opened, and I felt like someone had just hit me with a metal baseball bat. There was a little blood, but mostly I had the biggest goose egg I've ever seen on my forehead. I didn't pass out, but I felt very woozy. Ironically, my guest that day was Dr. Dan Mizuki, who checked me out and sat with me for about 20 minutes before we decided I was okay to go ahead with the show. Actually, I think I decided I was okay. I think the doctor was a little skeptical, but we got it done. And I think all that proves is that the real achievement and excitement is not what happens behind the scenes, but the conversations we were able to have in front of the camera with so many wonderful guests. They really helped to make the show special. I'll be back in a minute. That's it for this week. Our 500th show is now in the archives. Remember, anytime you miss the show or want to see it again, you can find it at uppermichigansource.com. Thanks to Senator Tom Casperson, Steve Asplund, and Rick Rhodes for sharing some memories with us this week. And thank you for tuning in. I hope we can get together again next Sunday morning.